The Pure Hoops podcast is a presentation of Pure Hoops Media. The Pure Hoops podcast most definitely does reflect the views of our management. Here's three-time NBA champ BJ Armstrong and Eric Newman.
The Pure Hoops podcast. We are back to close out September. Eric Newman in New York, BJ Armstrong in LA. Obviously, media days and training camp are around the corner. But BJ, first, we had a chance to have a very esteemed guest on the pod today, the one and only Sam Smith, who, of course, recently worked with Derrick Rose on his new book. And I know you've got a great history with Sam.
Yes, I do. And, Sam covered me when I first came in the NBA in 1989. And this takes our relations back 25 plus years that I've been knowing Sam. And now having an opportunity to work in the representation side of the business and working with a client such as Derrick Rose. And when we first approached Sam with the possibility of taking on this project, he was our dream option to work with Derrick in that capacity, knowing his understanding of basketball there in Chicago, the city of Chicago, and knowing Derrick's story from afar because he covered Derrick. And we were just thrilled when Sam said yes, and I thought he did a great job of capturing the essence of who Derrick is, what he means to the city, what the city means to him, and being able to capture his voice. So we were just overwhelmed with the response of the book and how the fans have responded with it, but more importantly, how Sam was able to work with Derrick in that capacity and be able to really put out such a great read that we're just thrilled with.
From the Jordan rules to I'll show you, BJ Armstrong and I with the one and only Sam Smith. We now welcome in Sam Smith, longtime NBA writer and columnist, currently works for Bulls.com. Sam is also the co-author of Derrick Rose's new book, I'll Show You. Sam, appreciate you jumping on with BJ and I. Obviously, you and Jay have quite a history from Chicago, but thanks for taking the time. Everything good on your end, especially after the release of the book?
Well, it can't be better being involved with BJ in any project. So it just elevates my profile, if not my legacy as well. So I'm very excited. Yeah.
Sam, I feel the same way every week doing the show with BJ.
You should.
He continues to elevate my level to new heights.
Very fortunate to be in that position, both of us today. So I'm ready.
I know. It's Sam, I've always wanted to ask you this. What was it like covering, before we get to the Derrick Rose and the book, and you did such a wonderful job, but I had to ask you this question. What was it like covering a young BJ Armstrong?
Because I was there the day you came in with Stacey King and was it Jeff Sanders?
That's right. That's correct. 1989. That is correct.
89, where Jerry Krause, and in theory, it should have worked out better, but it was not a great draft class. No offense included. Although the rights, as I recall,
none taken, Sam. None taken.
Your rights were acquired for Brad Sellers. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
But the Bulls didn't originally have the pick. Actually, Jerry had done. You could say it was a remarkable job. Jerry was a forerunner of what became in recent years, all the tanking. Really, Jerry essentially invented that he didn't completely, because Bill Fitch did, and that led to the lottery in '84. But that was Jerry's plan in '85, when Jerry Reinsdorf Group brought the Bulls, and they had Michael Jordan there already. And they had a bunch of older players, Gene Banks and Jawan Oldham, and Krause, sort of did this addition by subtraction thing where he was able to, and effectively trying to lose, which alienated Jordan, because people don't forget, in Michael's first 10 playoff games, he lost 9. But that's because Krause was offloading all this talent, and they had moderate talent, and they could have been, 40-some win team in mid-40s and stuck there. But he kept trading off these players for talent. to lose games, not to the extent the Sixers did, which was sort of criminal, and probably most of those guys should have been in prison. But that aside, that's probably another podcast. So
yeah, Sam, those 86, 87 Bulls rosters that snuck into the playoffs, those were some thin rosters. And does this tie back to the debate about whether or not they wanted Michael to come back for the stretch run of 86, which of course led to him playing against the Celtics and having the 63-point game in the first round? Wasn't there a lot of debate that they wanted to keep him out of the lineup and stay out of the playoffs?
I think Jerry Krause did probably. He wouldn't have minded, because he would have, in what became popularized in recent years, he would have preferred the draft pick and let it go. But that, it's a good point that you bring up, and there's a distinction. People talk about Jordan and the greatest and everything he achieved. But to me, one of the great distinctions between Michael and the current era of players is he wanted to play all the time, and he insisted on playing. And in fact, many don't remember, in the standard, as BJ would know, the standard NBA contract, you can't do certain things. Jay Williams had his contract voided in his motorcycling accident, and I think there was an occasion with the Knicks, somebody had gotten injured. I forgot which guy it was, and so you had to get and plus basketball games, you had to get approval to play in sanctioned basketball games. Michael, in his first contract, had this clause put in saying, I can play basketball whenever I want, wherever I want. It became to be known as the love of the game clause. There's no other player in the league had, because he just wanted to play all the time. And so that comes up. He broke his foot the third game of the year, and typical of Michael, he went back to North Carolina to rehab instead of staying in Chicago, so he could play pickup basketball. So he's back playing pickup basketball back in North Carolina, like a month after breaking his foot. And then the doctors did tell the Bulls that if he did this again, there was a threat of his career, not being able to have a career. So the Bulls, being cautious, Jerry Reinsdorf particularly said, it's not worth it. They had this famous meeting where Reinsdorf makes an example and says, well, look, if there's 10 pills in a bottle and you got a headache, and one of them has cyanide and the other are good for headache pills, would you take them? And so Michael says, well, it depends on how bad the headache is.
That's amazing. Well, there's our show promo for today. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, and that was Michael's, sort of Michael's way, but his competitiveness, everything about him. So he insists that he plays. So they come up with this odd, minutes thing, which not as crazy minutes thing they have now too, which is all, fake science. There's no science to any of that crap that they do with load management and all of that. The guys just don't want, to compete like they like. And I'm not just saying it's great then and not great now. It's great now, guys. Guys are better athletes and they're fabulous talents. But like what Kawhi Leonard did last year was an embarrassment. Sitting out 20 games, there's been no essential reason, and the Raptors had to go along, obviously. But I'll drift along. I answer long, and I don't know if that's good for. It's probably not good for.
No, all good. I'm about to bring
BJ,
you back to the BJ question. Yes.
BJ's point about, I remember usually the questions the first year was that it should have been, this bounty, because the Bulls had 3 first-round draft picks along with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Horace Grant. And it turns out, it wasn't a great draft. Purvis Ellison was the number 1 pick. And if you go back at that 89 draft, actually, that's one of those drafts, if you did again, BJ would be a top 10 pick based on his career, which included a starting berth in the All-Star game, right, BJ?
Right, that's correct. That is correct.
BJ voted an All-Star starter. That's some trivia that I'm sure maybe you didn't even know. But BJ was in a difficult position because he came in as the next point guard to follow John Paxson, who had established himself as maybe the only other guy at that time who Michael really had confidence in and
Right.
really liked playing with, and who didn't shoot the ball very much. So Michael really liked that. And so, BJ came in. It's interesting. BJ, was sort of a modern guard of this era, where he would have been, he came probably 20 years too early, because in this era he was more of a scoring guard, and if you scored, he could have scored. And the Bulls, were more of with the triangle, triple post offense system, more of a pattern system.
Right.
So it was interesting to watch BJ because he tried to basically sort of like a jigsaw puzzle. He tried to find his way to be the piece that filled out the puzzle, and did a good job of it, by sacrificing a lot personally. The interesting part, I wrote about that in the Jordan Rules, was, BJ was hard to get to know early on. It wasn't as effusive as he is these days, but I remember he was showing me, I was asking him about playing with Jordan back then, which was difficult for all of them because Michael was so dominant and so good and so demanding and so frustrated because the team was not succeeding on the level that he wanted, compared to Bird and Magic and all. And so BJ had gone to the library, and you might have to help your listeners tell what that is. Now, these days, I don't know if much used, but to look at books, to get books on genius, on excellence, to try to see how it would work to fit in with Jordan. I thought that was a really, really impressive thing to try to do, for a young player struggling, on a basketball level.
Yeah, BJ, you're a pretty bright guy part of the time. It's
yeah,
impressive.
that's no, it's
well. The only problem
great.
was BJ asked me to read him the books, though. That was
hey, Sam. Just before we move forward, what do you recall, Sam, when Jerry bought the team in 1984? Right? Who you and I are both very good friends with. We're fond of Jerry. Do you recall what was the number? Because when I look at these. When I look at these teams, he bought the team for $16 million in 1984.
Right.
Wow. What? That's vision.
And it's probably doubled in value since then.
Let me check into that, Sam. Let's check into that. Well, let's.
That's amazing.
Well, here.
So Sam, just to spin it forward from the great era that BJ was a part of, and then obviously, Derrick Rose, a local kid from Chicago, drafted number one. What was the feeling in the city when Derrick went number one, and what was that anticipation like before he put on the Bulls uniform for the first time?
The interesting part about it, Derrick grew up in Chicago and was a local legend, prodigy, really. From BJ would know these things better than I would, but having worked with Derrick on his book and learning more about his history, I didn't know, all the prep history. And the Bulls, had been a good playoff team and had, not great, but they were winning 50 games. And then they had a down season. The coach got fired and they ended up, ninth. And so there was really no anticipation that they were ever going to be able to draft a player like that. And it sort of fooled me in the sense too, because Derrick, to me, and obviously biased having worked with Derrick and known Derrick, that he's as misunderstood as any player really ever. And a lot of people are misunderstood because you just don't know him. And part of it is the title of the book, I'll Show You rather than I'll Tell You. Derrick has never been one who's either good at or open to really, he's always was very friendly and open and cooperative, but was not going to tell you his life. But if you look back, there were some extraordinary things he did in the high school championship game when he was a senior. He scored 2 points. And so the reason he did it on purpose. He did it on purpose because he wanted to help his teammates get college scholarships. And to me, that was one of the most extraordinary things I'd ever heard, because, it's first of all, something you never see. A guy's natural proclivity is to score. But Derrick knew and he understood that he could dominate the game from any position. I mean, really, he didn't even play point guard in high school. He played small forward because his buddy was the point guard, and he didn't want to take the job from his friend. And he could do that. He could play. I mean, basically, he was point forward. And he tells the story of when John Calipari came to recruit him and said, he was shocked. He said, "Why aren't you playing point guard?" And so he said, "Well, I can, I just don't." And of course, so he ends up getting 2 points, but they win easily, and because he wants to help his teammates, and because he's about winning the game. And so he goes to college, gets this nothing program into the final game, which they lose overtime, whatever it was, and is in a big score. And again, he's trying to really help his teammates. And so when he came to, when he's about to be drafted number 1, the notion wasn't that, we're getting, this is the next LeBron James or the next big thing. In fact, there was a serious debate leading up to that draft about taking Michael Beasley. Because the Bulls had Kirk Heinrich, who was, not great, but he was a near all-star, made the USA team once. He had been a number 1 pick a couple of years before, and he needed scoring. And Beasley was viewed as, he was going to be the next Kevin Durant. And it came from, the same conference, averaged 30 points, so it's very similar career trajectory. And so and there was debate among the Bulls. They'll deny it, still, but I think they got to a few days before the draft, and they weren't sure whether they were going to pick Beasley or Rose. So, and the notion was, he can be a really good player, but he's never going to score that much, because you looked, he had 2 points in his high school championship game. He averaged 15 or 16, whatever it was, in Memphis. He wasn't a great shooter. Of course, that was what they said about Jordan when he came to the NBA. Can't shoot, never going to be a great scorer. Averaged 17 points in college, so never going to be a scorer like that because he can't shoot. And so, the notion that Derrick was going to be this player that he became, a guy who was, MVP, capable of leading the league in scoring, and could carry a team like that. We didn't see that. Maybe BJ saw that, and none of us saw that. So it sort of not that it became a complete surprise, because everybody knew how talented he was, but to have the impact he had, that really was amazing on an NBA level. One of the things I want to mention is, there's always this talk, and Derrick was asked about it. He did a couple of interviews in the book a couple of weeks ago before the book was released. And he always gets asked this question about, being in the Hall of Fame, because every NBA player has ever been an MVP is in the Hall of Fame, or, likely to be Steph Curry and Harden, whatever. And the radio commentators always say, well, it'll be everybody but Derrick Rose. And I thought Derrick's answer was, he had a nice answer to it. He said, I'm a Hall of Famer. To me, for what where I came from, and Derrick's story is a remarkable story about growing up in that neighborhood in the south side of Chicago and all that stuff. But I like his answer about that. But I also do think he will be in the Hall of Fame and should be in the Hall of Fame. And that's what I reflect. And obviously, I'm biased. I haven't seen so much of him, but there are a lot of Hall of Famers. Hall of Fame is not just longevity. Putting up a lot of numbers over a lot of years. It's also impact. Bill Walton's a great example of that. Had a very short career, but fabulous impact. And if you win the MVP in a year that LeBron James, one of the elite players in the history of the game, is not only in his prime, but completely healthy, and that's one of the most impactful things that you can do in a career. And then you add that on to the high school thing, the college thing, as a rookie, equals Kareem's record for most points in a playoff game, and, multiple All-Stars, and going to, averaging, 19, 20, whatever it was. And then, now being able to come back and get 50 points. I mean, you look at guys like Grant Hill, Bernard King, guys were injured and came back. Derrick, because of his accomplishments in total, what he's done, and the impact of it, to me, that's Hall of Fame credentials. So anyway, I went on a little tangent there.
No.
Something I always wanted to mention.
Absolutely. No, Sam, you've had an opportunity that I can't even say a few, that really only you have had an opportunity outside of his immediate circle have seen him in working with him so closely like you have, and the things that he was able to share. What was one of the most surprising things that you found out about Derrick Rose that you just weren't aware of? I mean, you've covered him, you've seen him, but then you were able to peek behind the curtain, because he doesn't open up a lot. He doesn't talk a lot. What was one of the most surprising things that you saw that you could share?
Well, and that's always why Derrick's been misjudged a lot, and part of it is right. He does, and a lot of guys, a lot of people, it's hard to open up. Always felt the inequity, especially in this era of the NBA, that kids are coming in as teenagers, and then just because you're in an adult job, you're expected to be an adult, and which includes, in this particular job, the articulation part of it, the verbalizing, the interviews, and that. Derrick has been indicted several times for things he said, which were badly misinterpreted to give the implication that he didn't want to play, which couldn't be more opposite. And I think his career trajectory shows that, coming back numerous times. I mean, you see like a guy like Andrew Luck, and no criticism of it. I certainly agree and sympathize with what he went through, but people don't understand about a year going through rehab, coming back and being injured again or unable to perform at your level. And yet Derrick has continued to fight through that so many times. It's been amazing. But, it's there's so many things. I knew one of the reasons I haven't done books like this, with somebody, but I wanted to. I was honored that you'd asked me and Derrick asked me to help with this, because I knew he had been so unfairly maligned, so misunderstood, and it had such a decency about him. Actually, it wasn't in the books. One of my favorite stories was when we would go into Philadelphia. Harvey Pollack, the famous PR media guy. He was the guy who held up the 100 sign in Wilt's game. I mean, one of the great historic figures in the NBA. And Harvey would always come to meet the top rookie, new player. And so he said to me, I'd like to meet Derrick Rose. I go, oh, yeah, sure. And I brought him over to the locker, and I was telling Derrick about, what Harvey, who he was and what he went through. And, Wilt, he'd worked with Wilt all those years in Philly, and so Derrick was, really interested, and he turns to Harvey and he said, "Could I get your autograph?" I thought that was just the coolest thing I saw. But one of the things from the book that was interested me and always struck me, that I was almost jealous in a sense that we know Derrick is very close. Family means so much to him, and he's a great father with his kids, close with his brother and his mom, and a lot of people have known about that. But he grew up in this horrendous situation. I mean, we hear plenty about the South Side of Chicago, and a lot of it is overstated. But he did play ball in a park where they had to recognize the sound of gunshots, and they learned that if they learned to hear that when they came closer than 2 blocks away, then they would go home. And so, to compare yourself or to think you understand what people like Derrick went through growing up, you have no idea. And that's just one example. And as you know, BJ, from the family, there was a dozen people in the house, and he was like, he lived in a closet. Closets were turned into bedrooms, and had this, really tough situation. Had to move many times, and he was talking about the kids in the neighborhood, and how all the kids, even despite everything, his mom having to put down rat poison at night so they don't get bites and stuff like that, and how all the kids in the neighborhood always wanted to play at his house because it was so much fun. And you would think, God, what a terrible situation. But that was to me the thing that stuck out about the nature of his family, this extended family, and this group of cousins and brothers and everybody living there, his grandmother. How close the family was, and how loving, and how together they were. And it's part of why, I think, Derrick is not so outspoken, because it's in, everything is kept within this sort of private group. And the fact that I remember, growing up, nobody wanted to come to my house. It wasn't a fun place. And, to grow up in that sort of situation, and all the kids wanting to always come and hang out at Derrick's house, really, told me something about the quality of, what kind of family that was. And despite what we would say about, what a horrible, early life and all, what a loving and fun place that was. And that really kind of struck me, and I kind of like that story.
Yeah, he's had an incredible journey. The clip from his 51-point game with the Timberwolves was actually in a recent ESPN segment that Derrick was a part of for a new show called Sneaker Center, and I was watching it the other day, and I was almost in tears as Derrick was in the clip, because you think about what this guy has been through, and you just described things from his childhood that I think most people don't know, whether it's, living in a closet, or knowing when gunfire was too close and you had to go home from the park. You can't help but root for this guy. So it's so great that he's still in the league. It's so great you guys were able to collab on the book. Obviously, your knowledge of Chicago Bulls and Chicago basketball in general is second to none. So, Sam, that leads me to a segment we do on almost each show before we let you go, because of BJ's career window. He was in the glorious era of the 1990s. So we do something called Back to the 90s, where BJ shares something that I put him on the spot about from that era.
Back to the 90s we go.
So obviously, you writing the Jordan rules, you know that era very well. Can you share something with us that is super special and unique about traveling with that first Bulls championship team, 91, BJ's second season with the Bulls?
Well, those are hard off the top of your head, because the difference was, back then, we didn't, I traveled, even though I was working for the Chicago Tribune then. We all traveled together, and we traveled in there wasn't a private airplane. We were traveling.
We were flying commercial back then. That's right.
Right. It seemed, if you mention that, I'm sure BJ runs into that with so many of his clients.
Hey, Sam, you remember this, Sam? Not only were we traveling commercial, remember we used to all have to carry our own uniforms on the plane and our shoes.
Right. Yeah. So, and the hotels, you remember too, we used to stay at the Sheridan Airport.
Yes.
On the grounds of the Cleveland Hopkins Airport. A lot of the facilities. One thing always sticks out to me, and again, it's sort of tangentially involved but it is one of my sort of pet peeve things, and it's coming up with preseason and all. And in that era, I think they play 8 or 9 preseason games now. It's it's again cut again 4, and what really upset me was football, where guys don't play at all. Nobody plays. It's unbelievable. They charge people, but there was a sense, and I'm getting into the old man stuff about the old times are good. And again, I qualified. This is a great time. Players are great. The league's great. things always get better. I'm a believer in progress. But, one of the things BJ would remember that we would travel around, and I don't know if he remembers there was a game in Lincoln, Nebraska. I remember that. And Michael had played, everybody played all the games. Everybody played 25, 30 minutes, and because it was games. And so they'd said to Michael about taking the game off, and he could rest. And he said, no. He said, we're in Lincoln, Nebraska. Most of these people, they don't ever get a chance to see an NBA game. And he understood who he was and who the Bulls were, and other guys did too. BJ and from that group, Horace and Scotty, and they understood their responsibility to the game and the league, but the game as much. And they all come out and they go and they play 30 minutes and play this, incredibly competitive game and put on a great show. And that's what's missing still. Again, in the NBA now, there's great talent, there's great players. Players are able to do things that players of BJ's era couldn't do, as far as athletically. But that willing, that appreciate, and I love the fact that the players to me have done a better job in distributing. I know everyone gets upset about super teams, but I think the players have done a great job. And free agency's been great. I think it's helped the league. It's made the league more vibrant and popular. I think the players this year have done a fabulous job about distributing themselves around the league. I think there's going to be a great season because of that. Probably the most competitive season since the mid-'90s when Michael took off for a couple of years. With you couldn't figure out a favorite. But that struck me traveling back then when we would travel around in the preseason and go to these non-NBA places, and everybody wanted to play, and everyone wanted to play a lot. And that's something I miss, and I really appreciated that. The players in that era had such an appreciation and respect for the game and the fans who were coming that they didn't want to let those people down.
Yeah, love that, and that's the era of basketball I fell in love with as a kid before becoming a teenager. So, Sam, going to leave you with this. The Bulls were bought for $16 million in 1984. They are currently valued at $2.9 billion. A pretty good investment.
Yeah, my salary hasn't been affected by inflation quite as much. Which is probably why I'm doing your podcast.
Well, Sam, we can't thank you enough. Sam. And
anytime, I got plenty of stories.
Yeah, plenty. Well, that's great. Thank you so much again, Sam. And God, we've been friends now for over 30 years or so. And,
and that's the thing. BJ is the only guy who hasn't aged in those 30 years. Pretty remarkable. Same laugh.
No, it's well, great. Well, thanks so much, Sam. It's a pleasure. You did a wonderful job here with the book, and
it's a great story. That Derrick, I'm really proud of Derrick for telling that story, telling it his way, and not holding back anything. And I think his fans and how popular it is. And that's one of the things you mentioned before. I don't want to hold you guys up, but that 50-point game, what struck me as much as two things. One was it was competitive right down to the end. It wasn't one of those, a lot of guys get 50 and they're just taking crazy shots or whatever. And he needed those shots at the end to win, which is the essence of Derrick. And the other thing was the outpouring around the NBA. He is so beloved by other players. And then that was what stood out after that, how happy fans were as well, our media or people who knew him, but how happy other players in the league were. And that's really something special.
Great stuff. The one and only Sam Smith on the Pure Hoops podcast. Sam, thanks again. We'll talk to you again soon, and hopefully some more excitement around these young baby Bulls this season.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Sam.
BJ, that was fun. Sam's got so many stories. And, one thing he said that really has little to do with Derrick, even though Derrick is on the Detroit Pistons this year. But He alluded to the fact that we're going into a season where we're not sure who is going to be matched up in the finals. There's no clear favorite. And really, one of the last times you could truly say that was back in the mid-'90s, 25 years ago, when Michael Jordan was retired between three-peats. But I found that interesting, and it makes me that much more excited for the season ahead.
Well, yes, it is. There's definitely some optimism in the air from a number of teams, from just from the simple fact of, constantly we're debating who's the best player. I think in a long time since when Jordan stepped away for a couple of years, where now there are a number of players who feel that they could be or should be considered the best player in the league. You have Giannis, who was the MVP. You have players like James Harden. You have Russell Westbrook. You have the veteran in LeBron James and Anthony Davis. So there are a lot of players. There's going to be some chains up there in Golden State who over the last 5 years have been kind of the favorite if you look on paper. And, look, they still have two of their all-stars still healthy, but, one is coming back off of an injury. So there are a lot of uncertainties going into the season that we're all speculating about. I think it should be interesting because if we learned anything from last year, I don't recall too many people saying that the Toronto Raptors were going to win the championship at the beginning of last year. So Kawhi Leonard and what they were able to do now gives a lot of teams the idea of things can go right if we can stay healthy, that anything is possible. So I'm really looking forward to the season this year, Eric, because there are going to be a lot of questions. There are going to be a lot of great basketball. And most importantly, there are a lot of teams that feel that they have a chance to really win this championship this year.
It's going to be a sprint in terms of teams really trying to get ahead, find their identity. As we know, there's a lot of new star pairings. Of course, Kawhi Leonard, the NBA Finals MVP, now with the quote-unquote other team in Los Angeles, teaming up with Paul George. The battle for LA is going to be pretty surreal to watch. We've never had this level of talent on both teams in LA before, with the Lakers and the Clippers. And of course, LeBron James rested, chip on his shoulder. The Lakers have made a lot of roster changes, obviously starting with Anthony Davis. So I can't wait, not just for, we always talk about the storylines we're going to get into, but you and I always remind ourselves why we love it so much. And that's what happens between the lines. I can't wait to just dig back in and really put the eye test to this stuff and see how teams are meshing and what the chemistry like is in new situations. And then you take a team like the Denver Nuggets, who's pretty much bringing back the same crew, now trying to develop a healthy young Michael Porter Jr. as well, them looking to take the next step towards competing for a championship. I'm really, really excited for what lays ahead. So great job today, my friend. I hope you have a terrific weekend. Just to remind you, I will be in LA next week, so we will be back in the same room. We're going to stack up some great content, and I hope you're ready for me.
I'm always ready for you, and let's get it done. And now let's get back to talking about the NBA. It's back, and we're back at it, and practice starts next week.
Can't wait. Special thanks, as always, to producer Mike Lieber, Bruce Bernstein, editor Ben Wolfen, and the entire Pure Hoops Media team. Be sure to check out the Mike Wise Show, dropping each and every Monday. Catch and Shoot interviews. We'll have a change with Catch and Shoot coming up. We're going to be running the feature interviews from the show because there's been so many good ones after the last few months. Those will be coming out on Wednesdays as usual. Buckets, Boards, and Blocks with the one and only Monica McNutt on Thursdays. And, of course, the Pure Hoops podcast with BJ and I coming at you on Fridays. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay pure.
The Pure Hoops podcast is a presentation of Pure Hoops Media.